Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this evening. Hola y bienvenido a nuestro seminario de web. This event is being simultaneously translated into Spanish. Este evento está siendo transmitido en vivo en español. To access that feature, click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. Para acceder a este servicio, favor de oprimir el botón abajo de su pantalla y seleccionar el botón para español. We thank Claudia Mendoza, who is offering our audience live Spanish interpretation this evening. Le damos las gracias a Claudia Mendoza, quien nos brinda la interpretación al español esta tarde. I will let Claudia take the interpretation from here. Some quick Zoom logistics for all of us this evening. We are going to be answering questions throughout the webinar this evening. For those of you who have joined us for webinars in the past, we often save questions for the end, but tonight we are really hoping to have a casual conversation with all of you. You can input your questions in writing via the Q&A function. You can see that little bubble down at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be answering your questions as much as possible as they come. Also, just want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded in both English and Spanish, and it's going to be made available on demand on our website by a week from today. And finally, I'm really excited to share that for the first time, we now have Zoom-enabled live transcript or captioning available in English. So if you would like to benefit from that feature tonight, you can click on that live transcript button that you see at the bottom right of your Zoom window. Before we dive too much further in, I want to ask where all of you learned about this webinar. So we are going to pull up a quick poll here. And if you don't mind sharing with us how you learned of this webinar, it really helps our nonprofit continue to proactively do outreach to homeowners across Napa and Sonoma counties to understand how you got to us in the first place. So go ahead and choose one of those options there in the poll, and I'll give you all a minute to answer. And thank you so much once again. While you're answering that poll, I'm also just wanted to share that we're really excited to do this kind of more casual conversation this evening. For those of you who have come to our webinars before, we really like to do a streamlined presentation as much as possible. And for this evening, we promise it will be streamlined, and we're going to hit upon those really key factors that are advertised for the webinar, but we're also just going to be having a roundtable conversation, and again, really inviting your questions. So super helpful to see there where everyone has learned of us. Thank you so much for sharing. Really helpful. We see a lot of repeat folks coming to us from our newsletter and other venues. Thanks so much. Okay. So for those of you who don't know me, thank you again for joining us. My name is Renee. I'm the director of the nonprofit Napa Sonoma ADU Center. And I'm joined this evening by some really wonderful folks who I'll be introducing to you shortly. I do just want to say a special thank you to Amity, our admin support superwoman, who is taking care of all of the challenging behind the scenes Zoom logistics for us this evening. And I also want to introduce Scott Johnson. He is the ADU expert for the Napa Sonoma ADU Center. He's also the founder of Pocket Housing LLC, a consulting firm that helps homeowners throughout the process of starting their ADU project from conception through permitting. And then we're also so happy to be joined by our friend Lindsay Moon. She is both a licensed mortgage broker and a prefab builder. So she brings great home and construction knowledge to the table. And she's passionate about helping to solve our housing issues and helping people attain home ownership and increasing their equity. And Amity is going to share longer bios for our guests in the chat as well. So what are we going to cover in our roundtable conversation this evening? And for those of you who didn't notice, we have kind of a holiday theme fireside ADU chat. And We really wanted to take the opportunity this evening to cover some of the topics that we've received questions from that we just haven't quite gotten to in our other webinars. So for those of you who aren't familiar, we have an entire library of on-demand recordings of our past webinars available on our website. Amity's going to drop a link in the chat to share that with you, and you can access them anytime. But we cover a really wide range of topics, from ADUs 101, which is a really great starting point if you're very new to the subject of accessory dwelling units, all the way through how to finance your ADU, which Lindsay joined us for, last February, I think now it was. A lot of jurisdiction-specific ADU webinars with planning and building folks from various cities and county throughout Napa and Sonoma areas, and a lot of other topics. Tonight, we're going to cover very briefly a little bit about budget and financing with a deeper dive into permit fees and some samples of what they are. Then we're going to chat about ADU pre-construction. So some of the stuff that's helpful to know before you begin your ADU project. One of the questions we get from folks is kind of feeling like what government agencies are that are involved in the ADU planning, building, and permitting process is a bit opaque. So we're going to talk about that. And then we also get a lot of questions about utilities, so like energy, well, septic, etc. We're going to dive into that and be taking your questions on those topics. Then we're going to chat a little bit about ADU construction and how ADUs are eco-friendly. We get a lot of folks in Napa and Sonoma counties who are really interested in how housing and climate intersect and how accessory dwelling units can be eco-friendly. And then a little about going into 2022, some of the new developments that we anticipate in construction. We welcome questions on any ADU topic this evening. So again, chat your questions throughout the evening. And then just so that you know, these are the topics we're going to be doing a little bit more of a deep dive into. Okay, a little bit first about our nonprofit. Napa Sonoma ADU Center is focused really niche on a goal of helping homeowners in Napa and Sonoma counties build accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. Our motivation is to increase housing affordability in our community, and you can learn more about us at napasonomaadu.org. We have a ton of helpful resources to guide you throughout your ADU journey available on our website. Again, check out those links that Amity is dropping in the chat. Really want to recommend that you check out our ADU calculator tool, our ADU workbook tool, a ton of helpful blog posts, and like I mentioned, those on-demand webinars. I want to make sure that I just mention before we continue the conversation that you can reach out to us anytime if you have questions coming out of this evening. Go to our webpage and click on the upper right-hand corner, the Contact Us button in the upper right of that webpage. You can reach out to us anytime with your questions about ADUs, and we will get back to you right away. And then we also do a deep dive. So if you want more individualized help, we do ADU feasibility consultations, and that's something that Scott here does for us. And we do a deep dive. We walk you through the whole process of the ADU project for you, what your next steps coming out of the consult will be, and really help you home in on what your goals and needs are and what you can build given your site and your budget. After that visit, we send you a customized feasibility report. So I want to ask you something that we've been really curious about here at the Napa Sonoma ADU Center recently, which is what type of ADU build do you think you'll choose? You might have no idea the answer to this question yet. And if that's the case, I highly recommend that you check out some of our past webinars to get some more information to inform your decision. We just recently did a webinar, all you need to know about prefab, modular, and manufactured accessory dwelling units. We also covered panelized. So if you want to learn more about those, check that webinar out. If you do know, we're so curious to hear if you're interested in a traditional custom stick build where the construction is conducted on site, or if you're thinking prefab modular, prefab manufactured, or prefab panelized, or if you're interested in prefab but not sure exactly what type. So thanks so much for sharing that information. We take all of this data and it informs the free nonprofit services that we provide to our community to make sure that we're responsive to your interests and needs here in Napa and Sonoma counties. I'll give you just a moment to complete that poll. And then we're going to dive into our content here in just a minute. Great, so 70% of you are interested in traditional stick built, 5% in prefab manufactured, and 25% know you're interested in prefab but aren't sure of the exact type, which is great. So please check out that webinar if you're one of those 25% to learn about the details of the different types of prefab, and come to us with your questions this evening if you want to ask more about it. All right, with that, we are going to start our little roundtable conversation with Scott, Lindsay, and myself about ADU budget and financing. Again, we've covered this in deep dives in prior webinars. This evening, we are going to really do mostly a topic of permit fees and then answer any questions that you have. And then we will move on to our other topics. So I also just want to share, if you go to the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom window, you can see it says view, and you have the option of selecting gallery view. I highly recommend selecting that view because that'll let you see all of us here having our chat together. So with that, Lindsay, I'm going to hand it over to you to kickstart our conversation on budget and financing.
Thanks, Renee. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. And yeah, we're just really, we have a lot of other webinars on budget and financing. And really what it comes down to is everyone's particular situation is so very different. So your budget and financing options are going to need to be tailored to your own project. And so, you know, certainly reach out to discuss your own personal situation confidentially. But it is projected that ADUs can add up to like 35% of your home's value. And that's pretty significant. And there are so many ways that ADUs are solving for a lot of our housing crises. I guess the most common way that folks really finance their ADUs are right now are cash out refinances, pulling cash out of the equity that you have in your home, or doing a HELOC, which is a home equity line of credit. And there are also quite a few different types of construction loans out there available. There are also some new loan options coming down the pipeline in 2022. More and more lenders are really coming on board with both modular and alternative ways of construction, as well as building ADUs. And some lenders are also even talking about maybe making their own proprietary ADU loan product, depending on what people's needs are. As far as a budget, though, always be sure to have enough for your project, overages and a contingency just for those what if moments. Construction is quite costly, as we all know, and building an ADU is the same as building a home. All of the trades go into building your property, your new home. So be realistic with your budget and be cautious about those that are promising really low figures with your ADU. You're not going to build an ADU for $25,000 to $50,000. Just not possible.
There's no magic secret of having it done for $50,000. It's just things cost what they cost, unfortunately.
They do, and yeah, I mean, labor's expensive and materials are expensive, and honestly, I mean, if it was that cheap, I think there would be trucks lined up down every street, right? If it was that cheap, it just doesn't exist.
Well, I will interject that we do see people do some interior conversion ADUs of already conditioned space for closer to 50,000 or even less, depending. And we actually just were meeting with a homeowner who's doing that. Scott, do you want to share a little bit about our recent feasibility consult and what the homeowner's doing?
Yeah, and actually we see this, we don't see this often, but when the situation is right, it's a really great solution for some people. We've had a couple of homeowners come through who basically have more house than they currently need, and it's worked out that the house they have can actually be segmented pretty easily with filling in a couple of doorways. and then installing sort of a kitchen or a kitchenette in the now new interior conversion part of the ADU. And some of them are looking at doing it as a junior ADU, which means they're less than 500 square feet. But the woman that we just recently talked to, she's going to go for a full, I think, 900 some odd square feet of her house. And it'll provide income. It provides more housing. It is actually, you're right. That's an inexpensive way to do it, because you've got the foundation, you've got the roof, you've got the utilities. You just need to segment them a little bit to allow it to become an ADU.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a story, if you go to our website, where you can get inspired. That's the tab on the webpage, of homeowners who are your neighbors here in Napa and Sonoma counties who have done ADUs. And one of them is it's a woman named Marion in Sebastopol. And she actually spent I think the number was 10,000, which my mind is a bit blown by that. She must have done a very small kitchenette and that's it. Everything else was already set up. I don't want to, oversell such a low number to people here. But she was doing it so that she could afford to age in place in her retirement and keep her home. And so that's something that we have been seeing of folks starting to think about their future and how they can make their property work for them in a way that's affordable. With that said, I would be remiss if I pretended that the average ADU, especially in Napa and Sonoma counties, is going to be anything approaching those numbers as you were getting to, Lindsay. And with that,
as a separate unit. Yeah. But I think it's a good interjection too, because a JDU, I believe, only requires a kitchenette and not a separate bathroom. So there are definitely options to generate additional income and build either an ADU or a JDU.
Exactly.
Good points.
And I say it, I think I've said it on every webinar I've been on so far, but every ADU project is unique. And I don't say that lightly, because it really is. It's a really broad spectrum of what people have with their existing house, with the financing they have, the needs they have. And so, very often, I think in almost all the cases on our webinars, we have to speak sort of generally and kind of go for the middle of that bell curve of where most projects tend to fall. But Marianne's case is a prime example of one where she looked at what she needed and was able to get it done for $10,000 and has been really happy with it. And that's because her particular situation worked out that way. It is possible, if you've got the right, you've got the right setup and you have, it will satisfy the needs that you have. It is possible. And so that's one of the reasons why we really look at the consultations are such an important part of it, because every project is unique. Everybody's needs are unique. Everybody's situation, their house, their site is unique. And so what works for someone is not going to work for everyone. But there's a huge amount of diversity in what's possible with ADUs.
Exactly. So we have some questions coming in that I'm going to direct us to. But before I say that, I also just want to put a plug out for some of these links or I don't know, whatever direction your chat is on your screen, the links that Amity is posting in here. We have an incredible ADU calculator tool that will really help you estimate your budget. So we have a question that's come in about cost per square foot, for example, which we'll get to in a second. But just want to put a shout out for pulling up that ADU calculator tool. If you feel intimidated about how to use it, we have a webinar where Lindsay, Scott, and myself walked folks through some case studies to show you how to use the tool. That is the financial case for building your ADU now and not later webinar, which is also linked to here in the chat. So check that out. It'll walk you through, and this is the key takeaway, not only the cost of the ADU, a rough estimate, of course, but also your return on investment. So if you're building an ADU to form a passive income stream, for example, it has local rents inputted as part of the algorithm in that calculator. And it walks you through in detail your monthly expenses and your monthly return on investment, and then the return on investment over time. Which brings me back to Lindsay's earlier point about how much ADUs also increase your property value. So we could talk about all of that forever, but let's turn to our questions. Scott, cost per square foot. This person's interested about comparing prefab to traditional stick built. If you watch our webinar on all you need to know about prefab, you'll know that the answer is it really can vary, not only based on the project, but based on whether you do prefab modular, prefab manufactured, or traditional stick built. So Scott, in a couple sentences, can you give some rough ranges?
Yeah, okay. So as brief as I can be, sort of the buy-in price for traditional construction is $350 to $450 a square foot. And the smaller that you are, if you're under 500 square feet, you're going to be more per square foot because you have to have a kitchen and a bathroom. Not talking about interior conversions or junior ADUs, but new out of the ground construction, and kitchen and bathroom are expensive. And so if you have 250 square feet, you still have to have a kitchen and a bathroom. So your price per square foot in that case is higher than something that's 700 square feet. For modular and prefab, the numbers can be a little less. They are often in that range, depending on what model you go with. But 300 to 500 is where I see a lot of modular projects come in at. So and of course, if you want to, you can spend far more than that. It's really easy to spend a lot more than that. The price per square foot, things to keep it down is have a simple design, have a simple roof line. Use the fit and finish materials in your ADU, whether it's modular or stick built. That can be 30% of the total project cost. So simpler flooring, the type of paint that you use, all that stuff adds to the bottom line. And so there are ways that you can try and control costs, but there are things that lumber is what it is, and copper is what it is, and that kind of keeps the price pretty high right now.
Yeah, I have to say, it's ideal to be able to build between 350 and 500. And it is possible if you can be savvy, but I really don't know of many projects in the Bay Area that are even like stick frame that are not 500 to 600 a square foot and then up from there with the cost of lumber and labor. But just like Scott says, your finishes are really going to drive the cost of construction, but then also where you're building too. If you're building on a slope, that's going to drive your foundation costs and all of the engineering and such a lot more. So
drainage and everything
the
else.
site, drainage, the site will be a big factor. And then also, of course, your finishes. If you're putting in a lot of glass and steel and high-end things, it's going to drive things way up.
You could have a jewel box, but it's going to cost.
Yeah, for sure.
With that said, I want to also direct folks to our vendor registry where we have builders, designers, and some prefab companies, and we're working on adding more. So go check that out if you're looking for options there. And I also want to answer another question that we have here, which is there a focus group for the Napa ADU, the Napa ADU topic, excuse me. So the answer is, so this person's interested in getting peer-to-peer feedback, tips and tricks, lessons learned, etc. So what I would say is we have Facebook support groups for homeowners who live in the cities of Napa and Santa Rosa. So if you go to our Facebook page for Napa Sonoma ADU, you'll find those two support groups. If you don't live in either of those cities, or if you do, and you want some more kind of support, you can reach out to us and do an ADU feasibility consult where you'll get one-on-one custom individualized advice. And then if you do a consult with us, we have weekly office hours twice a week with myself and Scott, Tuesdays and Fridays, where you can come any Tuesday or Friday from 12 to 1, join us in a Zoom room like this and talk through whatever stage you're at in your ADU project. So sign up for a free ADU feasibility consult. Scott will do that consult with you. And then after that, you have free access to the ADU office hours any Tuesday or Friday from 12 to noon. Noon to 1 for support. So I hope that answers that question. With that, I want to turn it back to Lindsay because you were about to talk about some new products.
New loan products, correct? Is that what we're...
Oh, or is that me?
No. I think I lost track of where we were. There are a few new loan products out there for ADUs. Again, it will really depend on your specific scenario and kind of how, what your needs are and how we can kind of make it happen depending on what equity you might have in your home. A construction loan will look at more of a as completed value once the ADU is built. So it can be a good option for those that don't have that much equity in their home.
And I know when we, back in 2017, 2018, we were talking with the Federal Reserve about loan products for ADUs because there weren't any yet. It was all well, as it is, much like it is today. They're mostly traditional cash out refinance products. And there was a lot of stuff that the banks simply couldn't do in 2017, 2018. They were regulated in a way that they couldn't loan on ADUs the way that they loan on multifamily projects. That's changing, or that has changed, and banks have been putting together, figuring out what their mechanics need to be in order to offer ADU specific loans that look at future value of rent and things like that as part of a loan to value evaluation. And that's all coming down the pipeline. I think there's one or two institutions that I know of in California that have started it, and there are more that we know are developing those kinds of things. So I think particularly in the next year, we're going to see a lot more of this kind of ADU specific loan package coming out.
And I would be remiss if I didn't use that as a launch pad to just give a shout out for coming up in 2022. We're going to be announcing Redwood Credit Union's new ADU loan product. And so it fits the bill of what Scott was describing there. We're really excited about it. We're going to be doing a webinar on January 27th that you can register for right now on our website. And that webinar is going to be the announcement of that new ADU loan product. And I think you'd be really surprised how many of you could easily qualify for that loan to build your ADU. It's really, really going to be a big game changer for folks up here, I think.
And all of these lenders too are very much okay with the prefab and modular building methods, as well as manufactured home loans as well. But I think it's really important to stress that, yeah, just even a few years ago, like Scott said, lenders weren't really considering this, and now they're really much more embracing it. And I think that will also continue as we get through 2022 and so forth. Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's turn to the question of permit fees. So I know we're going to talk about some sample permit fees, but I'm going to hand it over to you, Scott, to dive into that.
Okay. Let's see. I need to scroll and find the question on permit fees. Is it? Oh, just permit fees in general. Well, there are.
Did I totally skip way ahead on permit fees? Are we covering that in a little bit?
Yeah, but I can jump to it.
Okay.
Because it actually, I'll flip what my notes here, because it works both ways. So permit fees, we talk about fees, we talk about the soft costs of your project, which are the things that don't go into the construction of it. And permit fees are part of that. And one of the big headlines of ADU rules that passed in 2020 is that the state wiped out permit fees or impact fees for projects under 750 square feet. There are still fees, but the impact fees have been removed. And this becomes sort of one of those things where, the impact fees, building permit fees, utility fees, school district fees, these are all classes of fees that get charged for any construction project, in California. And ADUs are now a special class of building where they don't have to pay impact fees if they're under 750 square feet. And that can reduce the total fee amount of all the stew pot of fees. It can go from, $13,000, $14,000, $15,000 down to $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000. So it can really dramatically reduce the amount of fees that need to get paid. And the fees exist for a reason. Impact fees, they're there because the more people that live in your city have more impact on city parks and streets and the sewer lines. And, the more people you have, the more infrastructure you need to support. And that's what impact fees help pay for. They're trying to get ADUs built by wiping out those fees to make it easier for homeowners, because they realize that the financing is different for a homeowner than it is for a large house building company. But other fees, such as school fees and building permit fees, are still charged. And that's because with permit fees and school fees, particularly with permit fees, that's paying somebody to look at your plans, to review your project, to write you the permit, to do the inspections. I mean, part of your fee is to help pay for the people who do the work that need to be done to get your project approved. And school district fees, the more people in the area that, we need to help support our local schools. And so if you're over 500 square feet, you're going to pay school district fees. Utility fees are they're a separate class in some ways, because they get spread over a couple different jurisdictions. The local agency, the city, the county, they will charge you some small amount for a utility fee, but really the utility that you're using is going to be charging the most fees. So in Napa County, for example, Napa Sand, the sanitary district, there's one big sanitary district for the whole county. They charge you a fee for hooking up a new sewer or adding sewer capacity to your existing property. In Sonoma County, it's not one agency, there are multiple agencies that are involved. And so, those utility fees are essentially, you're paying to be part of the system that helps keep our whole system running. And so that's where all those fees, it can get confusing, because, who do you write a check to? Sometimes you're writing a check to a school district, sometimes you're writing a check to the city, sometimes it's to Napa Sand. And it can be very confusing, because I think often people think about public agencies, the city, the county, as being a monolith. And they're really not. They are a series of departments that are looking at the parts that they need to be paying attention to. So planning, building, fire, well and septic, parks, they all have their own sort of the world that they're concerned about. And that's where they focus, and that's where they put their interest in. And in building a house, you are going to be working with multiple departments, and each of those departments has different requirements and regulations, and some of them have fees. So it's very easy to say, well, it's the county, it's the city, but it really isn't. And so for people who are building an ADU, and this comes up with in homeowner conversations a lot, and we've never covered it in a webinar that I'm aware of yet. But there's kind of the big four that you have to work with, are planning, building, fire, and occasionally public works. And if you're in the county, well and septic for Sonoma County, or environmental health for Napa County, they handle the septic and well side of things. So planning, I'll be really brief here, but planning is basically concerned about what you're building and where. It's an ADU, it's on your property, how tall is it? Where is it on your property? Where are the setbacks? They're not really concerned about from the walls in. That's not their problem. That's building department. The building department is concerned about the very detailed nitty gritty of exactly how your building is constructed, how it's insulated. They're the ones who are doing the inspections. Is it hooked up correctly? Is the foundation done correctly? That's building department. And they're the ones who do all or the vast majority of inspections. And then the fire department, they will review your project to make sure that it meets fire codes. If you're building above a garage, you've got to put fire sprinklers in. If your house is newer than, I believe it's 2007, you've got to put fire sprinklers in. How far is it from a fire hydrant? That's the fire department, because they're concerned about fire life safety. And they're also, in coordination with the building department, going to make sure that if you need to have a 1-hour firewall between structures, or separation between structures, they're going to make sure that you've got that, and that you're meeting all the fire codes to maximize the safety of your property and the people who live there. Well and septic and environmental health, well and septic for Sonoma County, environmental health division for Napa County, they're concerned with septic and well. And if you are in a situation where you've got a septic and well property, that is your absolute very first step that you have to figure out is your septic capacity. Do you need to enlarge it? Do you need to get a new permit? Do you need to service or upgrade the system that you have? Because if you can't get septic and well solved, essentially water in and waste out, you simply can't build an ADU project. So that's, for people in the county, that's really their first stop, has got to be septic and well. So that was kind of a whirlwind through the public agencies, the departments that you're likely to be dealing with if you're looking at building an ADU project. And it can feel bewildering, because you think you're just dealing with the city, but really you deal with planning, and then you deal with building, and you deal with fire, and it's multiple conversations that all have to kind of happen together.
Thanks so much, Scott. And one of the things that Scott and I talk about is, it's so confusing as a homeowner, all these different agencies. And it feels like, well, if I contact the planning department at my city or county, then I've contacted my local government, I've submitted my talked about my permit and what I need to do. And that's it, right? I talk to my local government. I've checked, and it's like, whoa, no, there's all these different agencies that have different requirements. And sometimes the agencies don't necessarily talk to each other, or like, just because you've talked to planning and they said you're good to go doesn't mean that the fire department says you're good to go. So we actually did a deep dive on how to do a permit application for an ADU just a couple of weeks ago. That's available on demand on our webinar. Highly recommend you check it out. We were joined by the chief building official with City of Napa and a senior planner in Santa Rosa. So definitely check that out. And Scott, you want to share a little bit about one of our favorite jurisdictions in terms of what they do to handle this issue of multiple agencies?
Yeah, Healdsburg is really like in a gold standard on this. I really have to give them props for doing something that, as far as I'm aware, no other jurisdiction that we're aware of is doing. Is that they have what they call a one-stop shop for people who want to do an ADU, and it's essentially we often counsel people to try and get a pre-application meeting with the city where you kind of have an idea of the ADU you want. You don't have full plans yet, but you're thinking, okay, I want to do 600 square feet in my backyard, and I think this is where it's going to go. Healdsburg has, I believe it's weekly meeting where you can bring that information to the city, to multiple departments, and they will all look at it and give you tips and let you know, oh, you're going to want to watch out about this, or the building isn't separate enough from your main house, and so you're going to want to be concerned about that with fire ratings and things like that. So they really do have like I said, it's a gold standard in getting information to homeowners about their ADUs. And I wish we could see it. I mean, maybe we will in every other jurisdiction, because it's brilliant. And the people I've worked with in Healdsburg, it's been very, very helpful to have that. I know from firsthand from their experiences that it's helped them bypass problems and solve problems before they were problems.
And Scott, if you're in one of the other jurisdictions, what do you do? If you know that they don't have a one-stop, how do you make sure upfront day one what all the agency requirements are going to be?
Yeah, it's the thing that I actually do with agencies is usually my first call is to planning and say, here's the project we're talking about, here's where, here's the address, here's the their intended size, and planning will give me a little bit of feedback on it, and then I say, okay, so who in building should I talk to about this? Because typically in every department there is at least one person, usually more than one, but there is at least one person who is sort of the ADU specialist for their department. And planning knows the person in building is who's their ADU person, and so say, call Jim over in building, and he'll walk you through it. And as you go through the design process, I say, get a floor plan sketch, get a floor plan of your ADU and kind of where you want it in your property. You don't need to do engineering, you don't need to have the foundation determined yet, but once you kind of have a floor plan of where it's going to go, then work with the city, talk to each department, try and get, like I said, pre-application meeting where they get all these departments kind of in the same room, or they used to. It's all Zoom now, I believe, and electronic submittals, but they can look at your plan and go, sort of the same thing as a one-stop shop. It's just not codified like it is at Healdsburg.
Thanks so much, Scott. So we have more questions coming in that I want to turn to. Before we do that, I want to ask Amity to pull up some sample permit fees. Talking about giving shout outs to jurisdictions, the City of Napa has a really comprehensive ADU permit guide. It's really amazing. And if you go to page 13 of that guide and you're saying, I want to see, can you give me some estimates for what do we mean when we're talking about these permit fees? Because some of us have heard just nightmares of like tens of thousands of dollars in permit fees. And it really depends on your project. But let's super briefly walk people through a couple of these samples. So this is going to be on your low end for a junior ADU. Can I hand it back to you on that, Scott?
Yeah, and so you can see kind of there's the cost of the building permit, the cost of the review, the cost of fire review, cost of planning review. So these are the city employees who are looking at your plans. They're taking time out of their day to actually look over and make sure that your project is going to be okay. You've got some other minor things. The SMIP, I'm going to call this out because I found it really interesting, is actually a statewide tax for for earthquake monitoring, for running the earthquake monitoring program in California. I thought that was fascinating. And then you see here the sort of the minor utility fees, plumbing fee and electrical fee, that just are part of the process of building in in Napa. That's what they charge you. And so, and then Napa Sand, which is its own separate fee, there is on the bottom. So you've got the city of Napa fees are one line item, and Napa Sanitation is another line item because it's another agency. And then we'll see in the bigger projects, junior ADU is probably as inexpensive as you're going to get in fees. You get a bit more. So here's less than 750. So still no impact fees, no park fees, nothing like that. But you've got more engineering. You've got a stormwater plan check fee. You've got a little more of the residential plumbing fees, mechanical fees, insulation fees. And so because you're building something outside of the house, presumably, you have a few more fees tacked on because your project is a little more impactful to the city. And then when you go up to above 750 square feet, this is where you see the numbers really start to rise because you start to get impact fees. And impact fees, park impact fee there is $22.93. Affordable housing impact fee is $5,700. So these fees really, in street improvement, utility underground, debris recycling, all those fees kind of add on and really drive the price up. So you went from, I believe it was what, $3,000 or $4,000 for under 750 square feet to almost $14,000 for over 750. That said, while that price gets a lot higher, if you think about the total cost of the project and you think about the life of the project, that you're going to have this ADU for potentially for decades, potentially after you're gone, it will still be an ADU for somebody. The amount of the permit fee, of the impact fees, should not really be the determining factor of whether you build 750 or 800 or 900. Your budget is going to, but honestly, that amount of fees, it ends up being a kind of a small part of the total cost of the project. And, a larger unit can rent for more over time.
Thanks so much, Scott. We have some finance specific questions I want to turn to, and then I just want to reassure folks that have other questions. We're going to turn to those shortly. So for the finance specific questions, we have a great question about how are property taxes assessed on ADUs, which I'm going to hand over to Scott. And then I'm also going to drop a link in the chat to a detailed blog post we have on this topic. So back to you, Scott.
Right. So I saw some of the tax questions, and yeah, that's a real common concern. There are a lot of people who've been in their home for a long time. I know my parents have been in their home since the 70s, and they've thought about building an ADU. And their house is paid off, and their tax rate is really low, and they're concerned about how that's going to affect. I will encourage that if you're thinking about an ADU, that you can talk to the assessor's office in each county. They've been very helpful to us in explaining how this works because I'm not a property tax expert. But in short, they will increase the property tax based on the construction value of your project. They won't reassess your whole property. They won't reassess the main house, presuming that you're not rebuilding the whole main house. But they will reassess you. They will assess based on the project value of the construction. So if there are some infrastructure improvements that need to happen for the ADU, maybe you're in the country and you're putting in a much longer driveway and you're putting in pavement, they're likely going to assess that part of the construction as well. But something like upgrading your electrical box to support an ADU is generally not considered accessible from a property tax perspective. And they won't reassess your whole property. So if you have very low taxes on your main house, those low taxes are not going to change, but you will be paying 1.25 or 1.1%, depending on your jurisdiction, on the value of whatever you build. So if you build, $300,000 worth of ADU, that's $3,300 to $3,600 of a tax assessment for your property taxes.
Thanks so much, Scott.
If I did the math right there.
It's always fun to do math on the spot in the middle of a webinar, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm impressed that you set yourself up for that one, Scott.
I walked right into it.
So we had another finance question I was going to turn to Lindsay on, and I'm trying to find it now. Oh, do you think the recent changes to FHA loans will help the buying of a property with an ADU? Do you have thoughts on that one, Lindsay?
Can you repeat the question? Because I was looking at a different finance question. Maybe I missed that one.
Nicole has a question down at the bottom. Do you think the recent changes to FHA loans will help the buying of a property with an ADU?
It's possible. I mean, buying a property with an ADU is not an issue. You can buy that using an FHA loan, a conventional loan. Yeah, there's not really a big concern there. As far as I saw another question about like being able to wrap up certain different things into a construction loan.
Yes, that was another one.
Yeah, you certainly can. You know, your construction loan is going to be based upon what the plans are, what you're looking to do. So you certainly, you know, depending on the scope of work, you might be able to wrap those things up. It all is going to depend on, you know, what you're looking to do and what the as completed value of the home is projected to be. Yeah, and I hope I'm answering that one question about FHA and such, but it really is going to depend on your own specific situation and what loan product is right for you.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. That's really helpful. To that end, I'm actually pasting into the chat for folks a blog post we have on purchasing new property, maximizing your ADU build potential. So it's not about financing, but for folks who are looking at purchasing new property and they know that they are going to want to build an ADU on that property, we have some tips and things to look out for there. So just wanted to note that since it's tangentially related. Okay, we have some more kind of construction related questions that have come up. So I want to turn to those in a moment. But first, let's circle back to ADU construction. Thanks, Amity. And we were going to dive into a little bit of a conversation on utilities, as I recall. So actually, that's back to pre-construction. Can we circle back to that before we continue? And I think, Amity, you'll have to just go backwards in the slide deck. Sorry about that. Thanks. So Scott, I'll hand it over to you on this one. You're muted.
Thanks. So yeah, this is something that we see a lot with, you know, upgrading your existing property for your utilities, because most cases you don't have excess utilities run to your main house. So having sewer, water, electrical, they will often need to be upgraded in some form. And depending on your property, depending on how old it is, that may end up being kind of significant. I saw that there was one question about a sewer line for the junior ADU, and the questions there, and you know that it may be that you need to upgrade the sewer line. In most cases, even houses that were built within the last 10 or 15 years, they won't have enough electrical power at the main panel to run both the main house and an ADU. And if you live in a house like mine is, that's 60 some odd years old, it definitely won't have enough power to run an ADU and the main house. So, you know, doing those kinds of upgrades, they become part of the project, and they can really determine what and where your ADU is going to be built. So sewer line in particular is one because it has to have a certain amount of fall, or you end up with a pump system, and tying into. Ideally, you want to tie into the main house sewer and main house water and main house electrical. But if you go big enough, you may be required to do all new hookups. So that's a new sewer lateral to the street. That's a new water lateral, a new water valve from the street, and that's a new line from the pole from PG&E. And that becomes a very that can be a big expensive project because essentially you're bringing all the infrastructure for a second house in and all of the trenching that was required and, you know, disturbing your back patio because you got to dig a trench through it for the sewer line. It can be a big project. And so when we do the consults, one of the things I often, one of the second most important things I talk about with people is, you know, look at your house, look at where your existing utilities are, talk to a professional, you know, pay a plumber to come out and take a look at your property and try and get feedback from him about what is possible, what's going to be the easy way and the hard way to do something, because there's almost always an easy way and a hard way. And if you can start planning that out early, then everything else becomes, you won't get hung up with doing the sewer and the electrical and the water, because you have already sort of thought that through. And that's important to try and think of pretty early on.
Thanks so much, Scott. And can you kind of reiterate that point that you kind of hit upon, which is sometimes you can save money by tying into your existing utilities, but sometimes you can't. So can you explain the fuzziness there?
Yeah, and a lot of it depends on what you have existing on your property. And this goes back to my maxim that all ADU projects are unique, and that my house, for example, was built in 1946, and it has an old power main box, and it has more modern water and sewer because it was hooked up in the early 2000s. And so in my case, my water and sewer are likely going to be okay for a smallish ADU. But if I was going to build 1,200 square feet, I would need to upgrade both of those things because they simply don't have the capacity to, run a whole nother house with 2 or 3 bedrooms. And depending on your house, depending on where you are, I know that in some cases there was a homeowner I was working with a couple of years ago who was building an ADU above his garage. And so the fire code requires that he had sprinklers, and his house was built in the 30s. And so he was teeing the water for the ADU off of the main house, but that wasn't, with the valve in the street, the size of the pipes that ran through his yard to his house, that wasn't going to be enough pressure and flow to run the fire sprinklers for his ADU. And so he went with a pump and tank system that allowed to reserve the water and keep it pressurized for the sprinklers, but he almost didn't have enough to run his ADU as well. And so he was faced with the choice of, do I upgrade the water all the way out to the street, which is additional permits and additional cost, or do I go with a pump and tank system and just get right under the wire of what my water valve will feed for my property? So it really is dependent upon your situation. And it's the kind of thing that most people don't think about or know about with their properties, which I didn't know about with my property until I started working in ADUs and doing design build work. And all of a sudden I was thinking, wow, yeah, the infrastructure really does matter. And so if it's big enough, you can generally tee off of your main house. If you have enough water, if the sewer line's big enough. If it's not, then either you upgrade the stuff to the main house, or in the case I know in Santa Rosa, if you're over 750 square feet for your ADU, they may require you to do a second connection to the water and sewer for your ADU. So that's really, it becomes there's a lot of variables involved. It's a long way to say there's a lot of variables involved, that it's about the size of the ADU, it's about the jurisdiction you're in, and it's about the property that you currently have, and all those mixed together.
And you're so good at explaining all of this for the lay person, Scott. So for the lay person who's listening to you and is either their eyes are glazing over, not because of you, but just because of the topic and the complexity, or their heart is starting to beat faster and they're like, how can I possibly build an ADU? Like, we haven't even started talking about like putting the walls up or anything, and I'm already lost and confused. What do we say to those people? What is their first step, and how do they outsource having to deal with this complexity?
Yeah, it becomes a series of choices. And Lindsay, you've done a lot of building, so I mean, you face this day to day, I'm sure, is that it becomes a series of choices of, I think for people is to, the way that I generally want people to go through it is get a sense of what you think your budget is going to be, what is possible for your budget. Is $300,000 possible, or is $100,000 possible, or is the sky the limit? That is kind of the first thing you need to get a sense on. And I'm not saying get a loan, but if you've got equity in your house, or you've got some money set aside, or you've got an inheritance and you think this would be a good thing to invest in my property, that's kind of the first determinant, is ballpark, what do you think your budget's going to be? Then, we've talked about, what price per square foot. Use our calculator, and start thinking, am I looking at a 400 square foot? Am I looking at 700 square feet? Am I looking at something? Am I looking at turning part of my house? Start thinking about the class of ADU and the size of ADU that you want to build, because that really is going to, those kind of pieces of how much you can spend and how big you're going to make it, where it's going to go, kind of determine everything else. And then you can start to think about the nitty gritty, because the next major thing in my mind is figuring out your utilities, at least figuring out where the problems are likely to be. is it sewer? Is it water? Is it electrical? Do you have a 100-amp panel in your house? That's not going to be enough. So, it's because you have to have all three of those things if you're in the city. If you're on municipal water and sewer, you have to have water, power, and sewer to make your house, whatever it is. Where the walls are, where the windows are, don't matter yet, because you still have to have water, power, and sewer to that house. And that's kind of sort of you're narrowing down your focus. You're narrowing down the possibilities. And you're looking for, where is this going to be a problem? What's going to stop me? What's the next hurdle that I have to look at? And then you can start to think, okay, I know that my water is going to be a situation, so I'm going to want to budget some for that. And I'll talk to a plumber, or I'll talk to the city and try and figure out what that's likely to cost. And that's going to change, what the ultimate design is going to be. But once you have been narrowed down to sort of size and class of ADU, that's when you start talking to professionals, the planner, the building department, plumber, an electrician. And I say, they're busy. Everybody in the trades are very, very busy these days. And so, honestly, the days of having a responsive free consult from an electrician or a plumber, probably you're not going to get a lot of response back from people. Unless they happen to be in the neighborhood and it's their lunch break. So, offer to pay them for an hour of their time, and have them come out and discuss, here's what you're thinking: 600 square feet detached in the backyard. I don't know where my sewer is. Can you help me figure out what looks like to be a problem here if you were going to do a sewer line for this project? That kind of industry knowledge can, and take notes and put it in a binder, and refer back to it, because 3 months, 6 months down the road, when you're talking with the designer, you're gonna think, oh God, that plumber said something about the sewer having to go. What did he say? And if you've got notes, it'll make everything smoother and easier, and ultimately cheaper for you, because you're not gonna run into a situation where all of a sudden you think, oh, I thought this sewer was gonna run here, but we can't do it. We're gonna have to do something completely different, and now my budget is blowing up.
Thank you, Scott. That's really helpful. And if you do an ADU feasibility consult, you can kind of sit down with you one-on-one, talk about your individual project, and say, okay, what were those things you said that I need to do? What are the next steps? It's all in that custom report that you get from us of your next steps and your professional team that you'll need for your particular project. So that's really helpful. I want to turn to some of the utilities related questions that we've gotten here. So I want to open it up to Lindsay or Scott, if either of you wants to just turn to questions that look that are standing out to you that are utilities related to quickly answer for us.
Yeah, I'll jump on Jonathan's question about the raised floor. And the simple answer is, it depends on where your ceiling is.
Can you restate the whole question though?
Sorry. For they're doing a 240 square foot junior ADU in the garage. He's asked, can we have a raised floor in order to hook up a bathroom to the existing sewer in the house instead of breaking new ground to trench the sewer line? And the short answer is, it really depends on your ceiling. If you have enough ceiling height, and this is a good question for the building department, to be honest. If you have enough ceiling height, you can do a raised floor. If you don't have the ceiling height, and I don't remember what the exact building code on that is. I want to say I actually don't remember, so I'm not going to make it up. But there is a limit that you can only have a ceiling so short for a living area. And so that's going to be your determining factor. If you have vaulted ceilings, it's probably not going to be a problem. I would check with both your plumber and the building department to make sure that what you have in mind is going to work.
Thank you. And Jonathan had a couple other questions. Do either of you want to jump in on those?
I'll read the question. It says, our sewer line is rated to support 2.9 people. Does this imply any JDU or ADU build out require an upgrade to our sewer line that can be added to construction loans or needs to be handled beforehand? No, if you're building and you need to upgrade a sewer line, it would all go all together. You don't want to necessarily do that and then start in construction. It would all go part and parcel. And certainly can be wrapped up into a construction loan potentially. I hope I'm answering that correctly, or the way I'm interpreting the question.
Yeah, I think it answers his other question as well above that, which is the infrastructure upgrades is much the same question.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So depending on what your scope of work is, if that's part of your construction loan, then that's what you're applying for. Then yes, it's certainly a possibility.
Thank you. How about Kenneth's question here?
Kenneth is a good question, and I actually don't know for sure the answer to that one. That's a building code thing, and I don't actually get that deep into the building code. I do know that acoustic separation is pretty common for common wall ADU, internal conversions or attached ADUs, that acoustic separation, and I have to assume fire separation, but I don't actually know the answer.
So Kenneth is asking about whether there's 1 hour fire separation, acoustic separation, and separate HVAC system required for an internal ADU conversion. I
don't think a separate HVAC system is required. And the firewall, I think, would depend on it. Yeah, I don't think so. Not for an internal conversion, but again, I would check with the building department and just to be sure.
And can that vary across jurisdictions?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'll say on the separate HVAC system, I lived in a duplex that had a common HVAC, and it may not be required, but I would strongly recommend that there is at least separate controls, or some sort of ducted system that allows each side to be able to control their own comfort level.
Definitely.
Otherwise, it's kind of a nightmare.
Very good call, Scott. The practicality and the livability are things that sometimes we want to ignore because of cost and complexity, and you will end up having years of regret once that build project is over.
Yeah.
And the multiple zone HVAC systems now are pretty competitive in price to the single zone. So it's worth spending the money now if you can.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You were going to answer Walt's question. What is your advice if you live in a registered historic property?
Yeah. So Walt, this is a tricky one. And I'm going to proceed very cautiously, but it's something that does come up. And so the state is cautious about this. In fact, I'm actually going to read a little bit from the state code here, because it says essentially that your local jurisdiction, they can develop guidelines and requirements, parking, height, setback, siding, all that kind of stuff. They can set up requirements for something that's a registered historic property or a historical district, but they have to be objective, and they have to allow it to be a ministerial review. And so the ministerial review is basically that anybody can come along with a check, and check things off and say, yep, okay, approved. It's not subjective where they come in and say, well, this doesn't look enough like the main house, or this doesn't look historic enough. It has to be a very objective criteria published beforehand. So it is tricky, and in some cases, I know that in ADUs in before the 2020 rule, sometimes they need to have a historic resource document prepared for showing the surrounding context in which the historic property was in, to justify the look of the ADU. I don't know that that's still always required, but a registered historic property is kind of another level higher than just living in a historic neighborhood. And so it's kind of an answer but a non-answer. And really what it's going to come down to is I would work with your jurisdiction. That would probably be the first question I would have for them is, I want to do an ADU. I have a registered historic property. It's, whatever the address is. I want to know what you will require of me to build an ADU on this property, because they should have something already put together ready to talk to you about with it.
Thank you, Scott. I want to turn to one of our next topics, and then we are going to get to other questions that are coming in. Let's talk about how ADUs are eco-friendly. We have a lot of people who in Napa and Sonoma counties are really interested in this subject, and Lindsay has a particular passion for it and expertise. So we'd love to hear a little bit on the topic from you, Lindsay.
Thank you, Renee. There are definitely some ways that ADUs are eco-friendly, and certainly if you can build a smaller footprint, you're using less resources. So be realistic about, the amount of square footage that you really need And of course, the big thing with ADUs is infill. We're infilling areas where there's already development. And so there are a lot less resources needing to be used for streets, curbs, water lines, sewers, and we're not expanding ever outward. We're keeping our footprint as is. So we're maintaining, urban growth boundaries. We are meeting major housing needs by keeping housing close to public transportation, and so less cars on the road, and of course more walkable communities. And I think everyone's looking for that more and more these days. Also, the advances on more modern building technologies, both modular and just better building today, better building codes, means homes are just better insulated, more energy efficient, and there are so many eco-friendly products to choose from both exterior finishes and interior finishes. The sky's kind of the limit when it comes to that, and not only that, they're becoming less expensive. A lot of eco-friendly materials were at a higher price point, and that's really no longer the case anymore. Some design and building tips, though, in terms of being eco-friendly, is just be cautious with your choices and understand what can tip your budget over the edge. Just know that, choosing these materials can really reduce your carbon footprint and create just a better indoor air quality. Less off-gassing of these materials is just going to create a better indoor air quality, especially if you've got like a HEPA filter on your HVAC system. And then, of course, I'm a big believer that, construction, the way that we build today, it is a little antiquated. Not a lot has been challenging it, and there are better ways to build that are greener and faster. And mostly it's really prefab and modular, where you're able to control building by maybe building within a factory a lot more, and having less time on site and less time going back and forth to finish your home. So modular and prefab are certainly some of the best ways to build that are the most green. And there are more and more technologies really coming online month after month. I really have faith in construction getting challenged and becoming more accessible and more affordable, but also greener. And there's also some talk about some kind of interesting possibilities with regards to kitchens and bathrooms. Kitchens and bathrooms tend to take the longest when it comes to finishing. There's, the cabinetry and the countertops and all of these different items that need to go in. There's some neat technologies that are working with prefabricated bathrooms and prefabricated kitchens, where those units would be installed within kind of a rough shell of a bathroom, and that would really help expedite the process and potentially make it a lot greener. Again, just all of those trips back and forth to the home can be reduced. And so I'm very excited to see where construction can take us, both in making things greener, but again, more affordable, more attainable. And I think also with regards to technology and being able to build within a factory, we could potentially be bringing in a lot more jobs and a lot of people who want to be building and be in kind of the tech world and the AI world, and being able to build more, think of like how we build cars within a factory with people, but also with robots. I think we'll be seeing more of that with regards to building homes in the future.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating stuff, and I think there's been a lot of technology in the last 10 or 15 years that's really started to mature enough to be viable for the building marketplace.
Acceptable and meeting all building codes, especially of California. Yeah.
I think we're going to be on the forefront of that, because of the, as building materials get more expensive, they're not just more expensive for the homeowner, they're more expensive for the companies. And so the companies have a big financial incentive to figure out how to do more with less, how to build more efficiently, how to have less waste in the waste stream, more so than just being a green company. It's directly their bottom line. And so I think, as much as it hurts to pay what we've been paying for lumber, having some high price spikes in materials right when the technology, robotic technology, the factory building technology is where is at right now, is actually might be enough to tip a lot of the construction in a way that we haven't for the past couple of decades. That there's going to be a lot more modular and a lot more prefab, and it's great stuff. You work with it. I've seen a lot of examples of it where it is really innovative, good stuff. And
yeah, and the more consumers demand it, the more and more innovative products will come online, and the price point will come down too.
Yeah. And particularly now that the financial institutions are more comfortable with it than they were 15, 20 years ago. I think that makes a big difference too, just like with ADUs. And I think, ADUs, one of the things that I think is really fascinating to me about ADUs is how we can increase our density without really changing the neighborhood character,
right.
Where we can get a lot more people closer to town, closer to their jobs, in stuff that's built sort of affordable by design is the catchphrase. But so the person who's working at the pub you like to go to isn't commuting from Lake County, isn't commuting from Ukiah because it's too expensive to live in Santa Rosa or too expensive to live in Napa. People who work at the wine bars, the people who the people that we interact with every day and every weekend. It's very hard. I say this with 2 adult kids who live in my house because they can't afford to live anywhere else right now. The housing crisis has made it very hard for people to live close to where they work, and that's vehicle miles, and there's also there's a whole equity thing of people who commute longer don't get to spend as much time with their family. There's not as much integration of people living where they work and being part of a community. And so I think ADUs, while it's not the panacea, it does move towards making things more equitable for more people and making our communities more resilient. And so even among sort of to me, the obvious of, well, it's a smaller footprint, it uses less materials, there's a lot of social construct benefits that come from having ADUs and having a housing that we can afford in our communities.
Absolutely.
That was beautiful, Scott. That would have been a perfect end point, yet we have so many more questions to get to.
I'll do it again in 20 minutes.
Perfect. And it's so true. The numbers are in Sonoma County, over 30% of people who work here commute in from outside of the county. In Napa County, over 50% of people who work in Napa have to commute in from outside the county. So whether they're living in Solano County or other places, it really, really does impact not only climate, but our communities, and is absolutely an equity issue. So I love that you highlighted that, Scott. We actually have a question that is kind of along those lines, which is, are ADUs subject to getting neighbors' approval? So do you want to talk briefly, Scott, about ministerial approval and how the new state law changed that?
Yeah, so the short answer is they don't. The short answer is that essentially the state recognized that was a big problem for all housing, all construction really, but all housing in particular, all around the state. And so the state has explicitly said neighbors don't get a say. Everybody is allowed by right, if they have the space, to build 800 square feet up to 16 feet tall, with some modifiers like, do you have a septic system to run that kind of house? But all the other standard ways that housing has been stopped in many areas in California and in our counties as well, the state basically took away that possibility and said you can't have that be the reason this doesn't get built. There may be other good reasons that it doesn't get built, but your neighbors saying we don't want the density is not one of them.
That's really helpful, Scott. And sometimes folks get anxious about parking because there are now some exemptions from replacement parking and parking requirements for ADUs. And folks get anxious, so many more parcels, thanks to the January 2020 state laws, are eligible, almost all, to build an ADU and a junior ADU. And, I think we can really look to Portland, Oregon as a really helpful example of what that means for a community. Portland has the highest per capita number of ADUs in the country. And that doesn't mean that every single property has an ADU on it. It's really the density of ADUs, even in the city that has the highest volume of ADUs per capita in the country is, you know, max a couple ADUs per block. So it's not like people are being inundated. With that said, we have a housing crisis in the state of California, and I hope that we can get as much housing built to house our neighbors, friends, family, and those people that are in our community as possible. And I think ADUs are a really important piece of that. Let's get back to the questions.
Just a quick aside on the number of ADUs. You know, Santa Rosa has tens of thousands of residential parcels, of single family residential parcels, and you know, they had, I think it was 180 or 200 ADU permits last year. I mean, so it's not even it's not even a percentage point. It's a hundredth of a percentage point of the number of parcels that are going to have an ADU. They don't work for everybody, but the more that we can, I'd much rather have 1,000 ADUs distributed across Santa Rosa than 1,000 home housing development on the edge of town on a greenfield development. You know.
Yes.
Particularly in the east where we get wildfires, you know. So if we provide 1,000 homes that integrate into our neighborhoods, we're all going to be better off than the other way to get those 1,000 homes, because the demand is not going away.
Yes. And I will say we won't meet our housing crisis only with ADUs, and we do need multifamily development desperately to meet that housing crisis. So
Absolutely.
It's a yes and for sure, which I know you agree with, Scott, completely.
Absolutely.
Okay, getting back to our questions, we have Madeline has been waiting quite a while for us to get to her question about Sonoma. So she says, Sonoma has a lot of biological issues. How can a home assess if their lot is going to be impacted? I think that's such a good question. Scott, how do you answer that question for folks that we meet with?
It depends on the biological issues that she's concerned about. I know Sonoma in particular has a lot of creeks. And so creekside setback is a big issue, particularly even in central Sonoma. And so in her case, what I would say is Wendy Atkins is the planner at the city of Sonoma. And if you're worried about that, this is a question of where can you build, basically, or what can you build? So this is a planning question. It's a what and where, not a how. And so I would go to Wendy Atkins and ask her, this is my property. I'm concerned about biological issues. What do you, as the city, what do you want to see from me? What am I going to be looking at? Is it creek setbacks? Is it, I don't think you have a tiger salamander issue in the city of Sonoma that I'm aware of. I think that's all more West County. But simply ask them, because they're going to know. And we do look for California tiger salamander issues. Again, those are all west of 101, but I don't know of any specific biological issues with regards to flora and fauna in the city of Sonoma.
Thank you, Scott. And I want to make sure we only have 10 more minutes, so I want to turn to our questions again and get to this really great question. Thoughts on small garage conversions? It's a really open-ended question. And I think one of the key things that we might talk about is sometimes folks think that a garage conversion is going to be significantly cheaper and easier than it actually is. With that said, depending on the garage you have, it could be. So do you want to fill us in on that? Either Lindsay or Scott. I saw Lindsay nodding.
Lindsay, do you want to take this first?
Sure. I think it can be a good thing, but yes, it certainly is going to still involve a lot of different costs to create a new unit. But then also, just think about how that might affect your home, and is it solving for an issue? And sometimes garage conversions can detract from the overall value, and depending on what you're looking to do exactly.
We'll often get people who are interested in garage conversions as sort of their primary discussion about an ADU, and as we walk through the issues, because it's easy, but it's not. There's a roof, there are walls, but the walls aren't insulated, and the ceiling isn't insulated typically in most garages, and they have to meet current Title 24. That's the energy efficiency standards for California, and so there ends up being kind of a lot of work in converting a garage. And while it's easier than building fresh and new, out of the ground, when people start to weigh the options of, well, it's still going to be quite a bit of work. There's still some engineering that needs to happen. There's still, review that needs to happen. I got to figure out what we're going to do with the floor and the sewer and everything else. And I'm going to lose where is my washer and dryer going to go? Where is my hot water heater going to go? How am I going to manage that? It ends up, for some people, they start to look for other options. And I know that garage conversions, when homeowners come to us, very often they're on a small lot. They're on a 6,000 square foot lot or less, and they don't have a space for detached or even an unattached ADU. And one of the things that I will often suggest as an idea is going above the garage if you can. If you don't have a 2-story house where you're right above the garage already, going above the garage is a little more expensive. There is some re-engineering work that needs to be done, but you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get the separation from the main house of the ADU. So whoever's living in your ADU isn't, doing jumping on a pogo stick above your bedroom at 2 a.m. And then you still have your garage, you still have a place to put your bikes and your washing machine and everything else, and the Christmas decorations that you take out once a year. So, there are trade-offs. But particularly for small lots, I think an above the garage solution, if it fits, is a really, really great choice for a lot of people. And in many of the neighborhoods that I've seen around Sonoma and Napa counties, very often, like an above the garage ADU wouldn't look that out of place. There are other 2-story houses on the street typically. They blend in very nicely, and they can usually be made to blend with the house very well. And so aesthetically, they end up working out as well.
And just make sure too that the garage too is a sound building into code. You could be opening a can of worms there too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, age of the garage and what the engineering is going to require you to reinforce it to hold that second floor are big things. And again, we talk about generalities, but your existing conditions are really important to determine what makes sense for you ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And Scott, haven't you said a year that's kind of like a rough guesstimate? Like if the garage was built after 2007, is it that it's more likely to be in a...
Yeah, I think that's when a lot of the insulation. So a big thing becomes sort of depth of framing for insulation. And my house was built with 2x4s. Most houses now are built with 2x6s, and 2x6s can carry a lot more weight. And I'm not a structural engineer. You need to talk to a structural engineer if you're considering this. But most houses that were built with 2x6s and up are generally fairly modern homes, and they will generally need less engineering work to support a second floor. Again, my example, my house was built in the late 40s. I would have to completely rebuild my garage to support a second story above it. But in my case, that may be a good situation. It may be something that's worth doing because it provides, I still get to keep all my junk in my garage. I don't have to find a place for it.
Thanks so much, Scott. I want to turn to a couple more questions and then we're going to wrap up. So briefly, Lindsay, can you answer Kenneth's last question? Is there a public resource available for finished materials and fixture selections that are, quote, affordable and green/sustainable, from which the homeowner can get a head start as they think about their ADU?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I can't say there is, but first of all, I mean, California building code is so stringent that choosing, like for your plumbing and electrical fixtures, you don't really need to worry because we have such stringent requirements when it comes to like low flow units that you just want to make sure you're choosing items that meet the California code. And it is easy to buy stuff online that does not meet California code. So just be careful with that because you could buy some things that may be green, but are not allowable for whatever reason. But I would say in terms of, choosing some cool countertops or some cabinets that might be greener, less off-gassing. Unfortunately, I don't really know of any online resource per se, but I would be very comfortable saying I'm sure a simple Google search would bring up, depending on what you're shopping for, just learning about different materials. There are, again, even with cabinetry, the formaldehyde, the chemicals that are not allowable in California really make a lot of materials that you need to use in California pretty green to begin with. But the sky's the limit. You could really kind of geek out on making it super green. But I feel pretty confident that if you're sticking with just the California building code alone, you're already getting a pretty green product.
And you bring up a really good point that California does have really strict building codes, and every 3 years they update. They generally get more strict. And so I know there are a lot of people who do online shopping who are either whether we're talking about appliances or building materials or even plans for ADUs. Your point about making sure that they are valid on the California Building Code is really critical, because we are unique in the country with what our building codes require particularly of our residences. And so that goes, I think, for everything from floor tile on up, to make sure that you're not going to get something that's not going to pass inspection. And particularly with, there are a lot of places that have sort of stock plans for sale online. And I've run into a couple of homeowners who kind of had horror stories where they bought things from out of state. They bought plans, or they have someone building them at home from out of state. It's not going to meet California code, and they can't get their money back. So the California code is a serious thing, and you're right, it does make things in much more green and sustainable than we are in many other places.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I believe too, when you're buying materials online, I know I've done it like on some of the larger sites, you can say like, I'm usually there's a selection saying that you're in California, and that it will only show you California approved appliances or plumbing fixtures or whatever. So that's nice. Make sure you can, that you maybe tweak your search when you're doing that.
That's an excellent tip. Thank you, Lindsay.
And Nicole's got a great tip. Oh, yeah, sorry,
Nicole. Yeah, Habitat for Humanity Restore. Definitely check it out. They have great stuff to reuse. Thanks, Nicole, for that excellent tip. Okay.
My kitchen flooring is from Habitat for Humanity Restore. That's where I get I redid half my kitchen with stuff from there. So yeah, they're a great resource.
They fantastic.
Are. That's so cool. Okay, we are going to turn back to our slides a little shout out about our coming permit ready plans program, Amity. And with that, I just want to say we're really excited about this program, everyone. It's going to be coming soon in the new year. We're collaborating with the jurisdictions across Napa and Sonoma counties to collaboratively developed one of the only comprehensive of its kind programs I'm aware of in the country, where we're going to have permit ready ADU plans that you can purchase. And we're going to have a gallery, and those are going to be signed off on in part from local jurisdictions throughout Napa and Sonoma. So a lot more details to come on that, but we are really excited. It's going to make it more cost effective and much easier for homeowners to find both prefab and traditional plan sets and move forward with their projects. I also just want to make sure that you all remember that we have that library of on-demand webinars. We also have this really exciting webinar coming up. You can register for it now, January 27th, in partnership with Redwood Credit Union, announcing their new ADU loan product. Really excited about that. So check it out. Hope to see you there. And I also just want to say a huge thank you to all of you. Reach out to us anytime with your questions. We're here to help you. Sign up for a customized individual ADU feasibility consultation with Scott. Join us for our future webinars. Check out our resources. Speaking of eco-friendly, wanted to make sure you guys saw that link that Amity dropped in the chat at 7:04 p.m. Green building strategies for ADUs in California. It gets into a lot of detail on that question of building eco-friendly ADUs. And thank you again for joining us for this ADU fireside chat. Thank you to our supporters, Napa Valley Community Foundation. We're a fiscally sponsored project of Napa Valley Community Foundation with support from Community Foundation Sonoma County and others. We really appreciate you all taking time out of your evening to join us for this ADU roundtable conversation. Thank you for your wonderful questions. If you have individual questions coming out of this evening, again, reach out to us. We're here to help you every step of the way. We're here to make this a streamlined experience for you. If you do a consult with us, you can come back any Tuesday or Friday from noon to 1 for our ADU office hours. We really want to help you catalyze your ADU project. We can walk you through the ADU calculator tool and show you how the return on your investment can work. You can reach out to the vendors on our registry, including Lindsay, to talk about your financial options to make it feasible, realistic, and smart for you to invest in an ADU. We can talk to you about whether prefab or traditional stick build is right for your ADU goals, and we can help you with your individualized project. So thank you all once again. We ask that you complete our anonymous feedback survey. It's going to pop up in a window as soon as we say goodbye and close out this webinar. So please give us your feedback. It helps us continue to improve our free services for homeowners across Napa and Sonoma counties. Thanks so much. Take care.